Hi, I'm Mike McAnrew, the editor of the Buffalo News Watchdog team. I'm here today with Chris Bragg, an investigative reporter for the news. He's based in Albany. And Chris has written a story about an avalanche of lawsuits that have been filed against New York State by former state prison inmates who say they were sexually assaulted by prison officers, corrections officers. Um, Chris has interviewed two of the inmates who filed lawsuits, as well as representatives of the State Department of Corrections and the State Attorney General's office. And he and I have read dozens of these lawsuits. Uh, Chris, tell me something. How many of these lawsuits have been filed against the state by these former inmates?
Yeah, there are so many of them that it's difficult to quantify, but attorneys who are involved with filing these lawsuits say it's almost certainly in the thousands somewhere. One Manhattan law firm that I worked with on the story has filed over 500 or plans to, in the near future, file a total of over 500. That's just one firm, and there are a lot of other firms involved in this kind of work as well.
Wow, that's a lot of litigation. Why is there suddenly a rush of these inmate lawsuits alleging sexual abuse by corrections officers?
So traditionally in New York, if somebody in prison wanted to file a lawsuit against New York State alleging sexual abuse, they had a very short window in which to do so, and it was often practically impossible for somebody who was in prison to really file a lawsuit. They would fear retaliation. So a lot of people didn't have an opportunity to file lawsuits before they got out of prison. What happened is the legislature last year passed a law called the Adult Survivors Act. It was signed by Governor Hochul last year. It opens a 1 year window starting last November until this November, allowing people to file lawsuits alleging sexual abuse regardless of when it happened. This is for people who were over 18 when the abuse happened, kind of a successor to the Child Victims Act, which dealt with allegations by children in a similar way.
And are these alleged sexual assaults happening at prisons throughout the state, including in Western New York?
Yes, there are allegations throughout the state. A lot of them deal with New York City prisons. There are also a bunch of lawsuits against New York City jails, but for our purposes, we primarily looked at Western New York prisons. One called Albion Correctional, and one called Lakeview Shock, that are in Western New York. And just this one law firm that I mentioned has almost 150 cases itself between those two prisons.
Wow. Now, you interviewed a couple of the former inmates. Um, Tell me about that. What was that like? And how are the two people doing?
Yep, it was. I haven't done a ton of stories in this vein, particularly with sexual abuse. So it was something I tried to feel out very carefully. And an attorney was on the call from this law firm that handles these kinds of clients all the time, and so you can glean a little bit from how they approach things, just in terms of the sensitivity that they use. But of course, as a journalist, my job was to get facts and get the questions answered about the incidents that occurred. I think both women did in detail describe incidents, including one who went well beyond what was alleged in her complaint, which is now being amended to include these various new allegations. They both seem to be doing fairly well. One of them has now become a mental health counselor who professionally helps women deal with trauma, including women who have gotten out of prison and are dealing with similar issues. And they both seem to be doing okay, but both had a lot of mental health issues that are ongoing related to anxiety insomnia in one case, PTSD in another case. So certainly, they have some issues that can be the basis of lawsuits seeking damages from the state.
So, from what you've seen of the cases, is it mostly female inmates that have filed these, or is it both males and females?
There are both. There are, of the cases I looked at, the vast majority, certainly from this one law firm, but from the others I saw as well, were women accusing male guards at correctional facilities. These all-female prisons, even though they're all-female prisons, generally have many male guards there. There also were a few cases I saw where a male inmate had alleged abuse, and a few where a female inmate alleged abuse against a female officer. So it wasn't across the board the same, but predominantly female inmates and male correction officers.
Could this cost New York taxpayers a lot of money? It sounds as if there's hundreds and thousands of these lawsuits, that this could be expensive.
Well, to my understanding, speaking to the Attorney General's office, I think the one reason they so vigorously defend these cases is not just because they're defending the state employee, but also because it's seen as defending the interests of taxpayers, for whatever merit you think that has. There's, to my understanding, there's no cap on Court of Claims cases in terms of damages. So, that's a dynamic, certainly. On the other hand, the Court of Claims is not viewed by claimants' attorneys as being a particularly friendly place to file these lawsuits. The Court of Claims judges are appointed by the governor. So it's not a jury of someone's peers who are deciding how much damages somebody should get. It's a bench trial where the judge decides, and that's often viewed by the claimant's lawyers as a less favorable place to try to get significant restitution.
Has there been much media attention to these cases?
There's been some. When right before the window opened, I saw that there was a New York Times article saying that hundreds of cases were pending with a single law firm. There hasn't been anything super in depth that I've seen getting into the prison system. So to the extent we got to that in this story, I'm glad we did, and I hope to do more follow-ups in the near future, getting into some of the broader issues that are at play here with corrections officer contracts and other things that might be in play in terms of what created this situation.
No, I'm with my final question, I'm going to chuckle a little bit as I ask this one. Tell us, how did you first get onto this story? How did you learn about these lawsuits?
Well, I have a very brilliant editor named Mike McAndrew who goes through Court of Claims lawsuits as a hobby, apparently. Saw that there were a lot of these cases being filed, and flagged that, and we started both looking at these hundreds of lawsuits and trying to make sense of them. And that's how it came about, and it turned into a very interesting story. So I'm glad you did.
It sure has, and it takes a good team of editor and reporter to do good journalism together.
Indeed, yeah.
Well, thank you for your time, and readers, I hope you are enlightened by what's going on with these lawsuits about the prisons. It's an area that most people never get to see. So thank you again for joining us.
All right, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.